I'm going to be honest enough to tell you that I'm worried about America. Yeah. I'm worried about our nation because it's sick with racism still. Just think about the fact that we live in a nation which was founded on the principle that all men are created equal. And yet men are still arguing over whether the color of a man's skin determines the content of his character. And I believe that the Lord told me to say to the United States of America that is sick with militarism and is sick with excessive materialism. Have you ever thought about it? There are between 38 and 50 million people in the United States of America who are poverty-stricken, making income less than the poverty level. And yet, this is the richest nation in the history of the world. Our national gross product this year will go beyond $800 billion. And yet, there are between 38 and 50 million people who are poverty-stricken. Now, something wrong. A lot of people are afraid to say it. But I don't mind saying it. You see, somebody said to me the other night, don't you think, Dr. King, you are going to have to start speaking more in terms of the administration's policy? Because since you started talking against the war in Vietnam, it's hurt the budget of your organization, and people who once respected you don't respect you anymore. And I had to look over and say, sir, I'm sorry, but you don't know me. I'm not a consensus leader. I don't determine what is right and wrong by looking at the budget of my organization. And I don't determine what is right and wrong by taking a Gallup poll of the majority opinion. And so because there's something wrong, our struggle must continue. And what we must see is that our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay.
I don't lead by consensus. Good everything. Hey, Dr. Carr.
Good everything. Good everything. Professor Hunter, hello. How are you? And everyone gathered here. How you doing?
I'm awesome. Dr. Bernice King shared this clip on her social media. And I think we forget, he gave a version of the speech the night before he was murdered, that America is sick. And, this whole notion of where we are, except there's nobody in the streets right now, in the summer for what happens in the winter. But we're here, and the boldness with which he spoke needs to be multiplied by millions. Shouldn't be one person.
No, that's right. It's he after he gave the "Why I Opposed the War in Vietnam" speech, said that April the 4th, 1967, as we know, a year to the day before he was killed. And as you say, that last public address at Mason Temple in Memphis on the 3rd of April, the so-called mountaintop speech, for which we rarely hear or take the time to listen because it's everywhere. Anything other than that last few seconds before he sits back down, he is very clear about where he's going. The target is on his back, target that eventually led to him becoming a premature ancestor. And what we just saw there, as you say, echoes 10 days after he gave that "Why I Opposed the War in Vietnam" speech at Riverside Church in New York. He gave a speech called "The Other America." And that line that we heard there, the summer-winter contrast, Dr. King, you see the fingerprints of Benjamin Mays and Howard Thurman all over him. He used those metaphors. He loves those weather metaphors. Remember, he did that in Montgomery after the boycott started, where we said we got shoved into the cold winter of our he loved those summer, winter metaphors. But that line he delivered first in public in the Other America speech, and y'all can find it. It's online everywhere. Get the transcript. You can see the whole speech. YouTube. So far, Sister Bernice King to post that, which kind of summarizes too broad a word, but everybody in Nubia knows, if you were a member of Nubia and a member of Narrative, joined at Narrative, and was in Nubia when we read Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, that book that was published right after he made transition, then you see that is where King is. I won't say was, because we have his words and he's continued to speak. That's where he is. And to say anything other than that, to try to compare him to those who traffic in hatred and fear, Dr. King can speak for itself. There's no need to try to use him another way. And of course, our hats are always off to Bernice King, who has made sure that she does not stay on the sideline. Every time they bring her father up, she's like, "Nah, here you go. Let my daddy speak for itself." It's quite a thing. So what inspired you, Pra, to have us lead this week with that particular?
Every day, I'm like the silent majority. It's almost like our silence is acquiescence. We know that phrase is true. And while we're talking very powerlessly and very fearfully. And it's bizarre to me that there are 300 million people, most of whom are not with fascism, most of whom are not in line with the bull crap and all of the other things, the bullying, bull crap from the bullies. It's wild to me that there's this kind of like sense of helplessness when we are the economy, we are the culture, we are everything. And if we decide tomorrow what's going to happen, that's what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
Yeah. Your former colleague, or your colleague, I'll say not former, because your paths didn't quite overlap, but y'all both taught in the classrooms as members of the faculty at Hunter College. The great John Henry Clark used to say that if Black folk decided to stomp at the same time all over the world, the entire world would shake. He said, all we got to do is decide to do something at one time and it would change everything. He said, if and I think, well, no, let me ask you, where is the sense that where's the sense of silence coming from, do you think? Like, there are a lot of people who would say, well, we're being silent. Where's that sense coming from?
So my mama, your mama, my grandmother lived in a time when the oppression was palpable. There were signs telling you where you could and could not go. The fight to upend that was every day in the household. There were all kinds of lessons about what to do when you go out, how to behave and all of the things. And then there was a strong sense of community. We gathered on Sundays, some of us gathered during the week as well for church and other, kinds of community activities. And it has been eroded, and I think on purpose. The social programming has scattered us in ways that have rendered us, I think, forgetful. And so now we're here with a version of that thing that our parents and grandparents, mostly grandparents, knew very intimately, with no direction. We've had 2-3 decades of quote unquote leadership that has taken money. The thing that King talked about, his organization not getting money, I was smiling because I don't know who's turning down checks today in favor of saying what needs to be said and doing what needs to be done. And so the lack of leadership, and King was, the spokesperson for a greater 3-4 organizations of people, or constantly in community around this. The legal giants, we talked a little bit last week about Thurgood Marshall. We talked extensively about Pauli Murray. There were all of these things happening. It wasn't driven by commerce. It was driven by what needed to happen. And now people are afraid of their checks that are going away anyway. People, hello. So you might as well stand up for something in the midst of this. You worried about somebody not giving you some money. King said, I don't lead by consensus, right?
That's what he said. And yeah, I think
I'm just saying, he died unpopular. But Black people, all of the people now, march with King. No, you didn't. You were sitting in your home wishing that Black man would shut up because he was making it difficult for you.
Yeah, no, yes. It's very interesting to see and to think about how we think about it, African Studies framework. The sixth category is movement and memory. How did or do we remember events, people, experiences over long arcs of time? And I was going back through the compendium and our bibliography, and when we in 193, session 193, no, 192 actually, 192, we talked about the subject was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And that was the second time. The first time was in 122. We were talking about Fred Gray. We were talking about Joanne Robinson's book, The Montgomery Bus Boycott and the Women Who Shaped the Movement. A single read of that book will reveal, I think, two things. One, that it underscores what you're raising right now, which is the strength of the institutional networks, to go to our second concentric category, governance, who we are to each other and how do we set up our protocols and how do we organize. The Women's Political Council in Montgomery, of course, very strong, had been working for years. And so when that boycott set off after Miss Parks was arrested, they were able to immediately turn their organized strength to that, with and in collusion with many who, to the social structure in Montgomery, to the white community in particular, were invisible. It's only after the success and years later that those who were at the center of it began, as we talked about at that time and have talked about since, women like Ms. Trenholm, Council Trenholm, who was the president of Alabama State, who to the white people in Montgomery was not involved at all, and who was not involved in the governance, but his wife was in the political council and was part of the people who were doing. So to the white public, it appears that these Black people were silent and were but then all of a sudden, there's nobody on the bus. So to underscore your point, there's an infrastructure there that isn't apparent to us now and that has been significantly weakened. At the same time, when Joanne Robinson, and who told this story to the day she made transition, but who in that single book, if folk pick it up, will see internally in terms of our governance formation, many of the things that we see today. So how we remember things, we were stronger then, absolutely. But we also had people who weren't involved. Like my mother grew up in Alabama. To my knowledge, she never participated in any political action of that sort. And at the same time, were there not those who were unhoused at that time? Not as many, not nearly as many, but yes, were there those who because of the as Dr. King might call them, the tragedies of life, might have partaken too much of the grape or of the cheap wine and found themselves, drunk on alcohol in the middle. Yeah, some of those people, when you read Joanne Robinson's book or the book Thunder of Angels, or even watch the film upon which that is based on those documents, Clark Johnson's great directed HBO film Boycott, which I just love. Some of them cats, they recruited them to sleep in the cars at night so the Klan couldn't slash the tires. I mean, so there were people then who are like people now. I ain't involved in no, but when called upon in a moment, like a flash, they're like, oh yeah, wait, there's something I could do? I'm not asking you to give a speech. I'm just asking you to sleep in this car tonight. I mean, anyway, but go ahead.
Correction. While your mother she wasn't out in them streets my mother, my father were not out in the streets. They raised children to know some things.
Yes.
So the act of resistance was in the household. In the books I had, Marcus Garvey teachings and Assata Shakur. Assata was in my house. The ISIS papers was in my house. They weren't out in the streets, but inside the house there were echoes of liberation. Eyes on the Prize. I had to watch it. Like I was plopped in front of the television and had to watch it. So I don't know that people are doing that today because I don't know what people are doing, but I know that the act of resistance, while it may not have been in the streets, it was actually in the house. You couldn't be here if your mother and father were not revolutionary in some kind of way. You couldn't be who you are right now.
I would agree with that. I would say that I agree too that we don't know. And I would also agree that and I think for the reason of apartheid during that period, Jim Crow, there was a often unstated but absolutely understood responsibility that was shared among adults to say, we must prepare you for this racist condition we find ourselves, so that the viewing of documentaries, the investment in time, the requirement that we participate, whether we want to not, in Black institutions like the church or community centers or wherever we found ourselves, it was necessitated by the fact that our parents had faced the true lost cause. And I appreciate what our brother Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote in Vanity Fair this week when he said that, among other things, that Charles James Kirk is being used by these white nationalists to try to engender a new lost cause, and so, but even if they do succeed, and they won't, I mean, it's falling apart. Their desperation this week to me is very exciting, because it speaks to their desperation. They know very seriously that, like tissue paper, this attempt is going to fall apart. So they got to just keep doing more. And then, of course, it has the unintended consequences, perhaps, of doing, this is where I'm going with it, of perhaps feeding an energy that we didn't have to have in the same way that our parents' generation and their parents' generation, before their parents, who were not captives at all, didn't know about this. It didn't have to feed the energy that our parents faced in apartheid, in Jim Crow and Jane Crow. And I'm saying that to say this, when you show yourself as your true self and it becomes unavoidable, I think I started to say believe, but this isn't based on faith. It's based on a study of history, that thing that animated our parents, it is not only still in us, because it ain't been but 5 minutes ago. Right. We remember our parents. It will be engendered in those who come after us. When to me anyway.
Do you think that the masses understand what it's like, it's one thing, and I'm walking this tightrope because I'm trying to understand. All right, I know what this is. You know what this is. You know what's going to come next. I know what's going to come next. We're not soothsayers. You study history, so history rhymes. But we have been so massively uneducated and then inundated with the screens that our brains, our little tiny brains have been, I think our brains have been addled. And I don't even know if we have the attention span to understand.
we don't
what to do next, as this is happening. It's a fire hose, and it's on purpose, right? It's this over there, fire everywhere. And people were just trying to hold on to something solid and escape at the same time. And I don't know if folk are ready. And that's my biggest concern. Like, that
folk are not ready,
are not prepared for what's coming, and they don't know what to do. And so they tune out completely.
Folk are not ready. Folk are not ready. And yes, these devices are going to continue to be a real challenge. I'm looking, this is the latest issue of New Yorker showed up in my mailbox yesterday. And there was a page in here, I might be able to find it, that talks about endings, which I thought was hilarious. I mean, this kind of dry wit and dry humor goes, but if I could find it quickly, how things end. But I won't be able to find it. That's too bad. But one of the things that did little paragraphs, little bite-sized paragraphs about how things end. And one of the endings was, this is how AI will end. And it will end with us scrolling, reading about distraction and how inattention has eaten our brains before scrolling to a TikTok video. In other words, we have all the information. How many times have we talking about stolen focus or the attention or slow productivity, Cal Newport or Jonathan Haidt, so we have the information. So I agree with you that we are not ready. I also think that it's not going to look the same. It's very interesting to me this week that it's intervened between 287 and 288, which is why we're here after all, because we know.
Correction. That was my fault. It's 289. I'm going to fix
289,
it.
I meant.
That's why
No,
I got
289. No. It was on me. That's on me. It should have been 289. I don't know why I was thinking 289.
I put the wrong thing up.
Did you? Yeah. But you know me, I should have caught that. We all working together. So I think, thank you. I think the fact that it's interesting because we have no way of really knowing, because we control what we can control. And one of the things that this religious zealot, political miscreant, Brendan Carr, I would say no relation, but since Carr is not the name of my ancestors, he can have it and everything around it. Brendan Carr, who wrote chapter 28 in the Mandate for Leadership known as Project 2025. This is the guy who is the chair of the Federal Communications Commission now. He was many years counsel. He was on the commission. And of course, when Trump got the power, he positioned Brendan Carr to run the commission. One of the things he's talking about in this small chapter, one of the things that he vomits onto the page here, this is on begin. He has several policy priorities. One is reining in big tech, whatever that means. This is the stuff. This is the red meat that you give to your base. I mean, I say whatever that means. He's very clear about what he means by that now. And of course, we know that big tech, by reining it in, he doesn't mean reining it in. He means making sure that control is in the hands of his ideological comrades, promoting national security, which is always the fear-driven booger bear that is used to rush people into a belief that they must rush into the arms of those who will protect them from the imaginary boogie people, the hate that hate produced, which is the theme this week. We'll talk more about that. That's the second of the four priorities, and we see that, of course, in play now. Although John Boy Roberts and his little team on the Supreme Court of the United States is now it's inevitable that they're going to have to decide on this. The first draft of briefs was due on yesterday, on Friday the 19th, for those of you who are now watching this on Saturday. And then the next round of briefs is due in early October, and then they're going to schedule probably oral arguments in the case of Trump's tariffs and the justification that he is using that doesn't give him constitutional authorization at all, statutory authorization at all. Those oral arguments will probably be in November, and then we wait to hear from the Supreme Court. But John Boy Roberts has painted his little self into a corner because the federal bench seems to be consistently ruling, although all they've done now is try to enjoin some of the tariffs. What they've been speculating, at least in terms, if you read between the lines of their decisions, at least the ones I've read, and the ones that are being reported on by legally trained reporters and those who are court watchers at the federal bench, is that these tariffs are unconstitutional. The gray area comes in, of course, because for the time being, which is something we can do something about next year, the white nationalists who have captured the executive branch of the federal government in the United States are being colluded with by the white nationalist federal legislature, the legislative branch. So the gray area about whether or not Trump can get away with these tariffs is whether or not the United States Congress will give him the authority to do that. And so far, the MAGA Muppet in the House of Representatives, Mr. Johnson, and John Thune, who is really just, it's not remarkable, because after all, when you start talking about white men who have ascended in part because of their white maleness, the only type of diversity, equity, and inclusion that really holds any weight in a white national state like the United States, that's the real DEI in this country. So to watch John Thune, Senator John Thune, I started saying embarrass himself, but he's really not embarrassing himself. He's kind of playing to type in terms of the history of this country. But we saw that within the last few days, they've blown up the requirement of a 60 vote threshold to move legislation in the Senate. And they've evoked what some folks, Adam Gentleson and others who used to be Harry Reid's chief of staff, called the nuclear option. So now you just need a simple majority. And so when the court rules on these tariffs, as they now will have to, as we knew they would have to, if they rule that these tariffs are constitutional, I'm sure they're going to try to figure out a way to use as a fig leaf the fact that the United States Congress has bowed down to the white nationalists who have captured the executive branch. Other than that, it would be very difficult to say that the President of the United States has the constitutionally enabled authority to execute tariffs based on the legislation, based on the statute that he's trying to evoke, except now bring it back, which I haven't left, to Brendan Carr's chapter 28 on the FCC in Project 2025, the second of his 4 policy priorities, promoting national security, which is why Trump is saying he has this authority, because he's engaged in some national security action. It's defensive. We got these enemies, these domestic and foreign enemies, in his addled brain and that of the people who are putting this battery in his back, chiefly Stephen Miller and that nasty piece of work, of course, at the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought, among others. The second of these priorities, promoting national security, is what they always use, this fear. We got to do this. We got to do this for the homeland. Well, Brendan Carr is trying to trigger it here in the case of the federal communications apparatus. And then he says the third of the 4 is unleashing economic prosperity. Well, that's never, I start to say it's code, but it's not code. What they're basically saying is let's privatize everything that we can. And of course, we see now with the Ellison family lining up with through Paramount Global to try to take over everything from CNN to the movies you watch through Warner Brothers Studio. And of course, through capturing Paramount, everything from BET and MTV to the Comedy Central and all this. Quite a moment, cable news network in their sites. This is Brendan Carr's wet dream, unleashing economic prosperity. And then the fourth of the 4, which is where I was going with this, triggered by what you said a moment ago, Prof, ensuring FCC accountability and good governance. The whole idea that they want to weaponize the federal government to do what they want to do. And that includes, by the way, if I go here to this section I was going to read from, but I won't read from it. I'll just mention it because let me go back. This is the reining in big tech section. They want to take over TikTok. This is on page 851. Address TikTok's threat to U.S. national security. As law enforcement officials have made clear, TikTok poses a serious and unacceptable risk to America's national security. Maybe it does. The Chinese, it was reported this week, aren't giving up the algorithm, the proprietary nature of their algorithm. However, as Ellison and his crew attempt to, and of course, Larry Ellison, like Musk, like Peter Thiel and all them, frenemies, but in Ellison's case, much more friendly at this juncture, allies of the white nationalists, they themselves being white nationalists in many ways. If you can follow their rhetoric and their support for white nationalists, open white nationalists like Donald Trump. And make no mistake about this, this does not start with Donald Trump. One of the books, in fact, I told the young lady, I was at a bookstore where they were attempting to rearrange books because they said they didn't want in Washington, D.C., some of Trump's people coming in, seeing these books on the shelf. So they had them for sale, but they had pulled them behind the shelf. And I was like, that's not going to save you. Those books are not, no. And I won't name the bookstore or where. Just know that this is the chilling effect. This is what they want you to do, to self-check yourself. And I said, you see this book right here? And I showed this young sister and this brother who was there working. I said, you see this book right here that I bought off the shelf, that I'm about to buy from you off the shelf? You compared it, what's in this book, to those books you got behind the shelf, you worried about because it looked like the title might trigger somebody. You should have put this book behind the shelf. It was one of the many recent histories of how the Republican Party has now become the open inviter of and home of open white nationalism in this country on the Republican Party. I think it was one of David Corn's more recent books, which I don't think I had a copy of for $2. I take a flyer, and if I got one, I'll just give this one away. But the reason I'm raising all this is because one of the things they want to do here in terms of broadband access, and Carr writes about that in this chapter in Project 2025, so-called Mandate for Leadership. One of the things they want to do is redistribute public dollars in terms of access to the internet and to all connectivity, broadband access. One of the things he writes about, he said, too much money been going to these places that already have connectivity. That would be Washington, D.C., Chicago, Memphis. That would be New York City or San Francisco or San Diego or Los Angeles. That would be Atlanta or Buffalo, New York. That would be Cleveland. In other words, the places where you live. So what Carr is saying is that, we need to redistribute that and also go into public-private partnerships, which means ultimately privatize and redistribute to rural areas and places like that. Well, yeah, absolutely. You got to make sure that everybody is connected, but at the same time, that's not what you mean. Because them same people in those places that you say aren't well connected, whose hospitals are closing because you done taken all their money and given it to your billionaire friends. Again, going back to what Martin King was talking about there in 1967, when he talks about all these poor people in this country. And then you fast forward to now in this week's Financial Times, when the writer, and I forget who it wasn't, Ed Luce, but whoever was writing about the fact that 80% of the people in this country, in the United States of America, I said this country, people are here from all over the world, 80% of the people in this country have some wealth, no wealth, really. They make less than $100,000, and 20% of the people in the country make more than $100,000. And I'm not just talking about wage earners, of course. But if you take that 20% that make $100,000 or more, what percentage of that 20% of the population that make $100,000 or more make much more than $100,000? You're going to find that number to be closer to 1% or 5% of that little group. But I'm saying all that to say that what the writer was saying is that group that's making over $100,000 a year, the closer you get to $100,000, the easier it is for you, even though there are people who live beyond their means, obviously, and all that. But then you start getting into $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, then millions of dollars, then tens of millions of dollars, then hundreds of millions of dollars. Those people are experiencing a great windfall. They're being relieved of any nominal tax burden, which is very much nothing. Was watching a debate that was taking place in the UK recently, and I think it was what's that hack? Well, I won't call him a hack, but anyway, I won't even name him. One of the talking heads that comes out of Great Britain was saying, name me a time when the rich have ever been taxed as much as they're being taxed now, and it ever did anything for anybody. And the white dude that responded says, my father worked in public service. I think he was a bus driver or something like that. He and my mother, they worked. They were able to buy a home. They were able to put us through school. They were able to retire. They're living comfortably now. They aren't rich, but they're living comfortably. He said, I can't do that now. He said, at the time they came along, the tax rates were very much higher on the rich in the UK and in the United States than they are today. So yes, I've just given you the example. And of course, this guy, yeah, because this is the propaganda. Anyway, weave all this together and we continue this conversation in terms of the hate produced. I'm saying all that to say that when Dr. King was talking in 1967, the tax rate on the rich is so much lower now than it was when he was talking about inequality then. And then followed that up with his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, where he really gets into the threats of militarism, the threats of materialism or capitalism, the threats of racism, those triple threats that he talks about, that we've talked about many times, and that for those who remember, and if you go into the Knarrative archive, you can sit at your leisure and listen as week by week, page by page, chapter by chapter, we read and discussed, where do we go from here, chaos or community? This is part of the momentum we have to have. This is part of the thing that Brendan Carr, a nasty piece of work, and his friends, Russell Vogt, another nasty piece of work. This is what these little men and women want to impede in Brendan Carr's case by perhaps reconfiguring access to the very broadband world that allows us to have these conversations week after week after week and be in the Mbongis that we are in right now in Nubia and the YouTube side, having conversation and add to the comments over the arc of the intervening weeks between the conversations. They want to try to shut down the conversations or manage them in terms of dampening the algorithm, as we have seen in recent reports this week about TikTok stripping out references to Gaza and dampening access, and how, what Elon Musk has already done to Twitter, which some people call X, as if somehow you got to make his reality your reality, which is the definition of madness. But the point I'm trying to make is that, why, I ask a question: why would you try to dampen that type of commentary, that type of connection? Why would you try to eliminate that type of thing? It wasn't, and it isn't because you think somehow the people are unaware or somehow oblivious, or no, it's the exact opposite. You fear the fact that at any moment your little hateful world will collapse in on you. So, and I wrap this up and we continue in this context, because in some ways we've kind of managed the science and technology category and also brought it into the social structure, but not on the Africana studies side, on another side, on the side of the broader conversation we're having in this country that rarely pulls out the Africana. The suspension of Jimmy Kimmel this week, where Brendan Carr is definitely involved in conversation with Disney and ABC and others. And then, of course, the affiliates, Sinclair and the other, what they call right-leaning, what I would call white nationalists. And, people say, why would you continue? Well, again, I will say it until I'm hoarse. A great read for you. White Nationalism, Black Interests, Conservative Public Policy in the Black Community by the great Ron Walters. You still get this book, White Nationalism, Black Interests, Ronald W. Walters, longtime colleague at Howard University, Department of Political Science, now an ancestor. Ron Walters lays it out. He ain't calling it right wing, conservative. It's not conservative. It's white nationalist. White nationalist outfits like Sinclair and others, who are the ones who said they're not going to run Jimmy Kimmel at night. And so ABC and their CEO, who's ruining his reputation, they said, well, okay, well, we're going to suspend him. And then, seizing the moment, realizing that their latest attempt to revive a lost cause may only have a very short window. Now the rhetoric even jumps to another level of absurdity, where they say they demand that Jimmy Kimmel give money to Turning Point USA. Well, there are many of them who understand that their little window was never very much open. It's probably closing even as they rush to try to widen it. And so they got to strike while the iron is hot. And this is the absurdity. This is the absurdity in commentary. This is the attempt to threaten people, everything from threatening their physical lives to threaten. Got a communique this week from a friend who's a member of Alp Street Baptist Church. It's saying, y'all be careful out here, right? Because Howard John Wesley did his thing this weekend. So now, he did this last week on Sunday sermon. A lot of ministers did in this country. So now, he wants you to think, okay, now we're going to come for you. Y'all got them kind of people. I mean, it becomes a situation where you're engendering this kind of attempt to create chaos or to broadcast that you're somehow your worldview is inevitable and you control, as Dr. King might say in his tonal parlance, the whole world. And Dr. King said, the United States thinks that they're policemen of the whole world. Well, you think somehow that you're in control of the whole country. Well, you know better than that. So you're getting more and more absurd in this. And I'm saying all that to say that getting Kimmel off the air, trying to send a warning shot across the bow. Well, guess what? Some of y'all got plans to go to Disney. Some of y'all got plans to continue to subscribe to Disney Plus. I know y'all love television shows, and I know that a lot of them are very good, very interesting to watch, and very entertaining. So, what would happen? And this is just speculation. I'm not asking anybody to do anything. I'm just wondering what the impact would be to the politics of Disney if enough people said, I can't support with my dollars. See, ballot box is one way of voting. Another way to vote is with your dollars. Another way to vote is with your feet. There are many ways to vote. To say, I'm not going to Disneyland for overpriced snacks and I spent $2,000. No, I'm just not going to do that right now. Maybe I'll do it later, or maybe never at all again. I don't watch NFL football and probably never will again. Who knows? Who knows what tomorrow brings? But today I don't watch it. And last year and the year before, I ain't watching the year before that, and I ain't gonna watch it this year. But the whole thing I find interesting is they're saying that, because they had tributes to the guy who was killed last week, last Wednesday, a week ago this past Wednesday, some of the NFL teams had moments of silence, and the ones that didn't, the people want to boycott. Well, what if the players decided that they didn't want to play in that league no more? Then all these hillbillies would be out there cheering for something else. I don't know what they'd be cheering for. But my point is this. Brendan Carr and them are trying to press the advantage they think they have in this moment because they realize how fragile this moment is and how temporary it is. And Dr. King is talking about something that is much broader in that moment. When he's talking about the other America, in that speech he gave about a week and a half after the Why I Opposed the War in Vietnam speech, and in the clip that we just saw, which echoed out of the speech that he gave on the 14th of April, 1967, where he talks about his worry, scared for America. He is looking in a much bigger frame. So today, what we do, what we've already undertaken and began to start doing, is to ask some questions. What happens when these manufactured grievances are used to shape politics? Mass politics, social media is used as well. And even this attempt is made to use these manufactured grievances to shape a sense of government, state government, federal government, local government. We know there's economic inequity in this country. Dr. King just talked about it again 50 years ago. He's given that talk on. White nationalism has been with us since the beginning of this criminal enterprise and this billionaire-driven media power. Larry Ellison and Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg, and all these cats, Elon Musk, they're not the first media mogul. Remember, one of the first movies to ascend to the characterization of greatest movie of all time, in the wake of the racist Birth of a Nation, of course, a few years before, was Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, which was a critique, of course, of William Randolph Hearst, a real life person. And Hearst was so mad about Citizen Kane, which was a send up of him and this attempt to buy the whole world and to control the whole media, that he tried to block Kane from being made, and he wanted to punish Wells for making the film. There's always going to be resistance. That was the 1930s. When some of y'all seen Citizen Kane, you know what I'm talking about. This ain't the first time you got mad scientists, billionaires trying to tamp down and tamper everything. So this is why Brendan Carr and his FCC that he's got control of right now, and where he also writes in here that there are powers that the director of the FCC has, the chair of the FCC rather has, that the members don't have, that he can just do what he wants. And that's what they're trying to, maybe he's trying to reconfigure broadband access so we can't do this all the time. But guess what, friend? You ain't going to stop us. It's not going to stop what's coming. It's not going to stop the potential of what can happen when enough people get together. That's why these independent, self-determining platforms are so important. Knarrative, Nubia. This is why it's so important to have those platforms. That's why it's so important to build with those who are using their attention to drive resources back into the community. Our good brother Lanny Smith and Actively Black, to see Bernice King and Ayasha Sabaz walking on the runway in New York Fashion Week last week with all the Actively Black stuff. And then Cecil Williams out there, and John Carlos and Tommy Smith out there, and two family of Tupac Shakur out there, Fred Hampton Jr. out there. And you buy that gear, and then we have the global majority. You buy that gear gets plowed right back into money that is used to build all these platforms, including this platform, including the hub, including the actively Black resourcers, which means the Black farmers who are growing the cotton that goes into the shirts that people wear. I had one on a couple of weeks ago right here. The Black cotton from the seed to the shirt, you know what I'm saying? Or the suppliers that Brother Smith and his people use in Actively Black. This I'm paying Black people, there's ways to build. Now, there are those who say we don't have any any buying power, and try to convince us that somehow perhaps we should. I'm not quite sure what we're being convinced of there. I think maybe do the same thing that people are talking about when they say get involved in politics, which is what? Challenge the state to repurpose our resources, the resources they take from our checks every week or two. I think we all going to end up the same place. It's just that, in getting there, I think the idea of taking no action at all to try to repurpose some of the financial resources we have is just sounds great in theory. In practice, of course, it's utterly absurd. But back to the point, these independent, these self-determining spaces, these governance spaces where our protocols are in place are the things that we have always recognized as crucial. The network and the Black Women's Political Council that Joanne Robinson and her comrades had together to this day. And before that, of course, all the other iterations, all of these things are critical. And for us specifically in this space, investing our time like a metronome week after week after week to educate ourselves, to become aware of things that we didn't know about, to tie them to things that we do know about, engenders not only a sense of hope and purpose, but a blueprint for how we can take that, adapt it to our current circumstances, and not only advance, but triumph. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today, because what we are doing is finding ourselves in a governance situation, who we are to each other, a relationship with a social structure that is attempting to impose censorship, which we must resist. And that in that process of resisting and the thriving that we tap into as a result, we can immunize ourselves against this political hypocrisy. We can disperse this rising racism and this fear-driven stuff. It's very important to understand. Since we were together last week, it's interesting because I don't know anything about the vagaries of the algorithms and but what is clear is just by a cursory glance at the conversations taking place in social media, in the conversations that are taking place in platforms outside of the invested in platforms like Knarrative and Nubia, what we see is a surge. Normally in our weekly conversations, we might somewhere between 15, 25,000 separate views. People will come in, sometimes multiply. Sometimes there's more than one person watching. For those of you who watch as families, or if you're in the barbershop or beauty parlor this morning or in formation, hey, love to y'all always. It's always good to be with y'all. See people all the time out in the street and everywhere. It's, hey man, we watching, we're together, Gil Prof Hunter, I love you. We love you. Hey man, we're doing it for each other. And so reinforcing that, this week it doubled what is regulars. Over 50-some thousand people came in, but that's not just us. That's a lot of different places. What does that say to me? That says that people now are starting to dial in and pay attention and say, what's going on? Well, guess what? We tell each other what's going on. We continue to work with what's going on, and we have been here a long time. So come on in if you're new to Knarrative and new to Nubia. It's good to have you in the family. We'll be back together in office hours on Monday night, and we'll have every day there's something else going on in Nubia, and stuff is being added as we continue. It's a beautiful thing. This space is growing and growing. If you're in the YouTube space and you're anywhere else around the world, come on in, sit down. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts and other ways you get this conversation, come on in, let's listen. If you're on the YouTube thing, hit that thumbs up and just keep driving that, because YouTube is very interesting in this regard. Unlike the naked politics of Facebook and Instagram and certainly TikTok in this regard, YouTube, at least as far as we are right now, I'm sure the nasty piece of work Brendan Carr and his friends may somehow try to get their tentacles around something to do around YouTube and try to figure out how they can do this. But right now, YouTube basically, we'll post stuff. Don't get in here talking crazy and cussing and trying to put violence out in the streets, which we don't support anyway in any form. But other than that, we just want eyeballs and clicks and likes, and we're gonna drop a bunch of ads in there. So for those who are watching and always say, man, I wish they wouldn't have those ads. Well, they seem to be, they're not a neutral actor. Nothing's neutral in the world. They want that dollar. So, just suffer and then continue in the rhythm. But, when we think about this, and now we want to run through our Africana Studies framework. If you're new to this, we always try to bring our conversations and form them around the Africana Studies conceptual categories framework, because it gives us a grounding. It gives us a common frame to ask questions and to be in conversation with each other, not telling people what to think, just introducing things in a format where we can continue to ask questions, get better answers from each other. Well, the first of our 6 categories in this week, talk about the hate produced, is this social structure category. Who are Africans? Who are we in this social structure? And who are we to other people? How are people in this social structure in relation with each other? Well, we know about the economic inequity. We heard Dr. King talk about that. And that other America speech still resonates. That divide between the top 20% and the bottom 80% who are suffering, not just the people who are the poorest in the United States and around the world, but the people who are working every day. There are people who can't afford right now to subscribe to Knarrative and pay that threshold fee, which we still keep low relative to what we're doing in terms of effort, because a great deal of this is initiative. We're just moving forward on initiative, moving forward on the fact that we have to do this. There's no alternative. But there are people who can't afford to do that. So we're here. We're here in the space. If you're on YouTube space, it means you have some connectivity and you've got a device, a phone, a laptop, maybe a tablet or something, or you're sharing it with someone. Well, that's a very important part. But you're making up part of that bottom 80%, probably. If you're in the top 20%, you ain't in the top 1%. And if you're in the top 1%, then you need to go ahead and write that check to enable a great deal of this. And for those, and remember our creativity, if you're around the world, the other places, there are people building these platforms that will be beyond the control of that nasty piece of work, Brendan Carr and his friends. So you continue to do that. That's why we continue to do it week after week. But we know that inequality, that inequity, that ultimate crisis in capitalism that was always coming, that Dr. King called out in 1967, it is starker today than it was when he called it out, which makes it more striking in this social structure that we find ourselves in. Billionaires and economic elites are siphoning public wealth through tax cuts, privatized healthcare, corporate consolidation, and now they want to be movie moguls again and media moguls again. We've seen Randolph Hearst before. Larry Ellison, your son, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk. Guess what, friends? You breathe like we breathe. You eat like we eat. You hurt like we hurt. You laugh like we laugh. And if you live your life in a way that engenders a sense of community and family, perhaps the last words on your breath won't be as they were in Orson Welles' mouth at the end of Citizen Kane. Rosebud. If y'all don't know what I'm talking about, go get the movie Citizen Kane and you'll understand that an awful day will surely come. And at the end of your life, do you really want to be thinking about the path not taken and what happened to you when you were a little child? Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that you can't save yourself from the inevitable. And ultimately, this social structure is driven by a fear. And that fear, whether it be of death or each other, that fear that drives the idea that maybe we can live forever. Xi Jinping and Putin talking about living forever. Well, guess what? Zuckerberg and them be talking about living forever. You think Jeff Bezos and them ain't talking about living forever? That's why the satire film Don't Look Up came out a couple of years ago. Let's get to another planet. Let's get to another one before. And they sending up the billionaires. Well, that fear then produces a hatred. And it's a manufactured hatred in some ways, because in order to get political power in the contemporary social structure, you've got to get numbers if you're going to have even the pretense of an election. In order to get those numbers, when you're trying to expand an authoritarian state or a state where you're trying to deprive people of things, you've got to create some form of animosity, some form of animus, some form of, to use the stronger word, hate, whether it be Modi in India or Trump in the United States, whether it be the so-called conservatives in Germany You see the Alliance for Democracy, the right wingers in Germany are making more advances. They had some more advances this past week in these regional elections they've had, or in the UK. Whether it be Malay in Argentina, and you see his policies are now beginning to crater, and he's got to give back some of that tax money he was siphoning off to his billionaire friends now because the elections are coming up and he's terrified. Or whether it be the guy who's going to jail, Bolsonaro in Brazil. You got to engender some notion of a manufacturer hate. And that hate that you're engendering, that you're trying to produces another kind of hate. Guess what? Because those people that you never deliver for are ultimately going to look at you like, what the hell happened? You saw it in the Philippines. Duarte, like Trump, going out here acting buck wild. Well, unlike the United States, there's a boomerang effect. And I'm not saying that this young boy is the child of the Marcoses, who's now the president, is that much better than Duarte, but Duarte was off the chain with his fascism. And guess what? You didn't deliver. That hate you were engendering produced a hatred of you. And so in this social structure, this inequity, this inequality, this continuing banging on people, this white nationalism that manufactures these grievances, understand the original hate was white supremacy, centuries of violence. This is the hate that projected into the modern world system. It's why we're having this conversation in English. The hatred of the indigenous people, the hatred of people who weren't yet white, like Benjamin Banneker's grandmother, Molly, who was an indentured servant, who was driven to what became Maryland because of a punishment that she got as an indentured servant in England. Get out. But I'm saying all of this based on animus, based on differences in culture, differences in language, differences ultimately in color. This original hate, that's the originary hate. The derivative hate is white nationalism's backlash against demographic change and this global black-brown assertion, what Karen Hunter has called, alongside so many others that precede all of our generation, the global majority. If you're going to count by color and culture, Europe is the overwhelming majority, and Europeans are the overwhelming majority. Or we can just be human in the world and enjoy each other's differences and have what W.E.B. Du Bois would call a broad sympathy for each other. That is the ideal. But if we're going to go to our corners, you got the smallest corner, whiteness. And there are many white people fighting to give up their whiteness. Our message to you is continue along that path and fight harder. We got to give it up. Got to give it up. This white nationalism, then, this derivative hate that came from an originary hate, not the first hate, but certainly an originary hate in the modern world system, which is this white supremacist attempt to unleash itself on, as Dr. King might say, the whole world. The derivative hate from that is this attempt to fight, to preserve that little knot of hatred. That's the hate that hate produced. And, reading Ta-Nehisi this week, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who wrote, let me see, I think I pulled it up. If I can pull it up quickly, I'll quote it. But if I can't, I obviously won't. Let me see if I've got it here. Yeah, I thought I had the Vanity Fair article up, because I got to go get a physical copy of it. I was reading it online, and I don't think I have it. That's too bad. Wait, here it is. Of course. Yeah, it's different to have the physical copy. That's why I'm going to go get a copy of it. It just came out. So there's no physical copy yet. I don't think. I went looking for it yesterday. It's called Charlie Kirk Redeemed. A Political Class Finds Its Lost Cause. This was published the 16th of September, Vanity Fair. By ignoring the rhetoric and actions of the Turning Point USA founder, pundits and politicians are sanitizing his legacy. I don't know who wrote that cut line underneath the headline, but I would say attempting to sanitize his legacy. This isn't about Charlie Kirk. It's interesting because last week and the week before, the week where we started with another nasty piece of work, an open white nationalist named Eric Schmidt, the senator from one of the two senators from Missouri, and his speech before the National Conservatism Conference here in Washington, D.C. If you haven't seen that in class, go back, not last week, but the week before. So you can go to 287, number 287, you'll see our conversation about that. And of course, last week we talked in the wake of the assassination, in the killing of Charles James Kirk. And I understand that, the difference between an assassination and a killing, you can debate to point out whether to call it a killing or a murder. assassination has a connotation almost of politics to it. But I understand also that part of assassination, part of the definition of assassination, the strict definition requires some forethought and planning. So I don't quibble the point. I just don't use the word assassination because to me, using language is very important. Using that language elevates this into something that can then be used as a bridge to make comparisons and connections, attempted connections that aren't there to be made, for example, between Charles James Kirk and Martin Luther King. But at any rate, the killing of Charles Kirk is an attempt to do this. So this is what Ta-Nehisi writes, and I won't go through the whole thing, obviously, in the interest of time. He says, before he was killed last week, Charlie Kirk left a helpful compendium of words. And that's why I refer to him as Charles James Kirk. That is his full name. Again, Charlie Kirk. I didn't know Charlie Kirk, never met Charlie Kirk. Probably if I had met him, wouldn't have debated Charlie Kirk because they're not debates. They're basically commercials under the guise of debate. He says, before he was killed last week, Charlie Kirk left a helpful compendium of words, ones that would greatly aid those who sought to understand his legacy and import. It is somewhat difficult to match these words with the manner in which Kirk is presently being memorialized in mainstream discourse. New York Times columnist Ezra Klein dubbed Kirk, quote, one of the era's most effective practitioners of persuasion, and a man who, quote, was practicing politics in exactly the right way. In quote, California Governor Gavin Newsom hailed Kirk's passion and commitment to debate, advising us to continue Kirk's work by engaging with each other across ideology through spirited discourse. And he goes on just to name some of these people. Now, we're not here to talk about Mr. Kirk. So, but what Ta-Nehisi is really coming to is that this is an attempt to, what I called last week, and we'll say again here, beatify Kirk, create an avatar for a lost cause. That lost cause is the derivative hate that the originary hate produced. The derivative hate of white nationalism's backlash against demographic change, global black-brown assertion, the idea that the poor will ultimately eat us all. They got to push back against that to keep their little thing going. And to do that, they got to continue to convince people of their inevitability, which isn't inevitable at all. Hence the increasingly desperate attempts to make people be quiet. Now you're going for the comedians. This is absolutely out the fascist playbook. We done seen this a million times. And rather than our silence connoting consent, oh, my friends, we walk through the world every day. We know what people think. We also know that at any moment, a bolt of lightning, an event could flash through the sky and reveal to these white nationalists and to ourselves how many of us are not going along with it. But in this moment, this attempt to project this notion that you're in control of the whole world is an increasingly desperate attempt to continue to foment your derivative hate and project this backlash of power or perceived power or attempted power against the vast majority of us, because you know that there's so many more of us than there are of you. So what Ta-Nehisi is walking through is, what I said last week. You're trying to seize on this tragic, senseless killing. In so many ways that I said last week, it's disrespectful even to this man lost his life, his family. But no, that it ain't never been about him. It's about you projecting and continue to use this. And y'all just getting increasingly desperate, passing resolutions in Congress, trying to make a holiday. Isn't it interesting how a creator works and how, in terms of ways of knowing the rhythms of the universe, conspire Charles James Kirk and George Floyd, same birthday. So now you want to make October 13th this day of remembrance. And if y'all do get a day, do you think that everybody understand how these rhythms are inevitable, whether you want them to be or not? At the end of his article, this is what Ta-Nehisi says. He says, more than a century and a half ago, this country ignored the explicit words of men who sought to raise an empire of slavery. 150 years ago, that was the Civil War. I'm going to go a little bit further with him than him and go to the Constitution of 1787. And before that, go to the 1490s when the Spanish came into the Caribbean. In other words, we keep framing the conversation in the United States in the context of the United States and the criminal invaders, the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, who came into this hemisphere, onto this part of the hemisphere. You got to widen the scope, brother. But I understand what you're saying. And for this point, I won't quibble it. There's a distinction that we don't need to make at this point. He says, more than a century and a half ago, this country ignored the explicit words of men who sought to raise an empire of slavery. They didn't ignore it, brother. They took up arms, as you know. It subsequently transformed those men into gallant knights who sought only to preserve their beloved Camelot. There was a fatigue in certain quarters with Reconstruction. This is what he's talking about, which is to say multiracial democracy and a desire for reunion to make America great again. Absolutely. Remember when Robert E. Lee died? If you go back through the papers and speeches of Fred Douglass raises this point upon the death of Robert E. Lee, who they have already tried to beatify. Remember, we talked about this in an in class. I would have to go back and get the number. If you go through the bibliography, if you're in narrative, you can find the conversation that we had about Robert E. Lee and where he was buried at Washington and Lee University, and the whole fight over monuments. I think Robert Jones was his descendant who's written recently about this and how these monuments need to come down, and how Lee himself said, don't be putting up these monuments. Lee, who was a traitor to his country, Lee, who went to West Point with all these cats, General Howard and all these guys, who then picked sides, who was offered the command by Lincoln of the Union forces, rejected it, and then went back to his Virginia and led the Confederate Army. Lee, who upon his death continued to ascend into this beatification. See, this is the thing about the United States of America. The Confederacy ain't just the South. The Confederacy is the whole damn country. How could you say that? I would say that because nobody except the American Negro and other people who understand sanity and who are not white nationalists, white nativist supporters understand. Everybody but those people understand this cat attacked your country and you're going to romanticize him in your textbooks, which we talked about, where the daughters of the Confederacy worked hard to get that stuff in the textbooks as the lost cause, as the war between the states after the Civil War, as in your popular culture, growing up watching the Dukes of Hazzard with rebel flags, or Leonard Skinner to this day trying to repudiate or trying to fight back against the idea that they ain't racist. Yeah, but you was waving that damn Confederate flag on stage while you was singing Sweet Home Alabama. Please understand, Southern man, to quote Neil Young, the whole point of you coddling white nativism by saying, well, it's just their way of life. You got to sympathize with them. And, I understand. No, I don't understand. Ken Burns playing that music. Boy, that music underneath that will make you feel bad for them Confederates. Well, guess what? You should never have started in the first place. Guess what? I am an African. You took our ancestors. And when you kill somebody so that their wife or their husband and their children can never see them, guess how long we've been suffering that in this criminal ass enterprise? From jump, my friend. And the sympathy is not there. But we have sympathy for each other. Sympathy makes me think of the great Scott Joplin out of Missouri and his song Sympathy. My favorite Scott Joplin ragtime, which is what he called a Mexican song. You hear that thing, go play Sympathy. I think I'm going to have to play it when I get out of here in a couple of minutes. But the idea is that we have always known in our governance formation that we will find each other, that we will build with each other. We will build out of our strengths, and out of those strengths, we will transform the social structures we find ourselves in. So Ta-Nehisi goes on and says, thus in the late 19th century and much of the 20th, this country's most storied intellectuals transfigured hate mongers into heroes and ignored their words, just as right now, some are ignoring Kirk's. And of course, all you got to do is read the history of intellectuals in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. W.J. Cash, The Mind of the South, being one of those threshold books that people refer to. I'm thinking about it now. Who else comes to immediate mind from that period of the 1940s and 50s? Kenneth Stamp on Reconstruction. Certainly, The Strange Career of Jim Crow, C. Van Woodward. I mean, these are just some of the kind of conventional books that you may or may not want to consult. For my money, 1935, W.E.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction in America. You might as well start there. And if you want to come forward to the conventional moment now, to this moment, if you want to read anything from certainly Eric Foner's work, or any of that stuff is fine. Certainly Manisha Sinha. Her work on Reconstruction, I think, is superior in terms of its documentation, its work. And there are many different places you can consult, but Ta-Nehisi is not wrong. These intellectuals of that period, the late 19th, early 20th century, tried to sanitize the Confederates. That's what they do, my friends. That's what is done in a white nationalist society. That is the hate that hate produced, the derivative hate of the originary hate. He finally finishes here in the last paragraph. He said, words are not violence, nor are they powerless. burying the truth of the Confederacy, rewriting its aims and ideas, and ignoring its animating words allowed for the terrorization of the Black population, the imposition of apartheid, and the destruction of democracy. The rewriting and the ignoring were done not just by Confederates, but also by putative allies, for whom the reduction of Black people to serfdom was the unfortunate price of white unity. Oh yeah, that's absolutely right. Redemption is what they called it. Nicholas Layman has a nice little popular book which talks about that in the wake of Reconstruction. Let's just shake hands and come together. The image from Harper's Weekly that the great James Anderson puts in chapter 1 of his book, The Education of Black People in the South. That picture of the Klansman shaking hands with the other soldier and the shield behind them with the Black woman and man and child cowering with the ink and the spelling book destroyed at their feet, and behind them a tree with a lynching, as we think about Delta State University in Mississippi this week, with a person swinging from the rope. The South redeemed, the lost cause written over the top of the shield. Ta-Nehisi is evoking that as he is writing. He says, the import of this history has never been clearer than in this moment, when the hard question must be asked. If you would look away from the words of Charlie Kirk, from what else would you look away? Well, evoking, of course, the strains of Dixie. I wish I were in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, Dixieland. So in the social structure category this week, as we're thinking about this, we think about the fact that the Ta-Nehisi's article, which is going right at the heart of the hate that hate produced, the derivative hatred, manufactured grievance. He's noting that the sanitizing and what I'm calling the beatification, the attempted beatification of Kirk in the wake of his tragic death and this lost cause came immediately underway and hit a fever pitch within a matter of hours. And now cancel that comedian, do that. If you talk, we're going to put narc on somebody in the classroom, get that person out to paint at their job. See, can you get this military person try? What the hell is going on? Well, guess what? Like any other desperate measure, you're throwing it against the wall to see if it sticks. But guess what? Like any other thing that is not superior to the thing you've thrown it at, it will recede. Will it be fast? Will it be slow? The question becomes, is this social structure strength strong enough for this to recede quickly? Is this social structure made of metal, at which point it's going to hit pop and just begin to slide down? Is it made of concrete, at which point pop, and as it slides down, it's going to leave some residue? I'm thinking probably closer to concrete. Is it something less sturdy? Maybe it's less sturdy. It's very interesting. This desperation and decline, this ruling class attempt to cement their control before they're outnumbered, which they're already outnumbered globally and increasingly here in the United States. This authoritarian playbook, Project 2025, this fusion of theocracy and state control to create this national identity grounded in white Christian nationalism, because that's what they're after. That's what Kevin Roberts and them are after. Kevin Roberts, nasty piece of work. Russell Vogt, nasty piece of work together. This idea, this isn't just economics. This isn't just politics. This is about identity. That's what Eric Schmidt was talking about, which is why we talked about him 2 weeks ago. This whole notion of fusing this question of a state to a concept of white Christian nationalism. Understand that when I say this isn't a nation, nasi, from the Latin meaning to be born, meaning a common framework, common memories, language, culture. The English is not the official language of the United States. There's too many different kind of people here. All these people together, can you create a polity where there are a lot of different people moving toward a common purpose that will benefit everyone? The white nationalists will say no. As Eric Schmidt said, if it's for everybody, it's for nobody. Out of his mouth, I'm not misquoting him. Y'all go back 2 weeks in here. Senator from Missouri. If it's for everybody, it's for nobody. They do not want you here. By you, I mean you blacks, you browns, you indigenous people, you white people who want to give up your whiteness to join our common humanity. And anyone who is confused about this project simply needs to read the Project 2025. Or if you don't want to read the Project 2025, just turn on the news for 20 minutes and see the engendered hate, the derivative hate that hate produced. This is the agenda. Fascism becomes us versus them. It's more than us than them. This idea that enemies are created to justify crackdowns. You see this fool Trump now saying, I'm going to charge $100,000 for these visas to bring people in. We only want the best people. Well, guess what? The Koreans, the South Koreans are saying, maybe we don't build no more factories or at least invest no more money over there. Yeah, y'all going to let this man get your economy killed. his obsession with black women, which I absolutely understand because it's two-sided. The hatred is also fueled by desire, my friend. Release the Epstein file. So we know that you're never going to let it go, chasing out district attorneys and U.S. attorneys because you can't get at Letitia James, lying on Lisa Cook, try to keep her off the Fed board, but her records are better than your records. Mad at people because they can't get at these black women. You understand where it comes from, Mr. Trump. And guess what? You, unfortunately, maybe, as the would-be Pope told Michael Corleone in The Godfather Part 3, you could be redeemed, but you don't believe it. And guess what? I don't have time to try to convince you that you could be redeemed, but you're going to leave them black women alone, my friend, because the continued hyping on that is going to continue to animate and trigger people who otherwise might be willing to let it go because they simply don't feel like they can get involved or should get involved in any overt way. Weaponizing tragedy with resolutions and attempts to create holidays and efforts to beatify folks. It's part of a long history in this country and in the world of using death and martyrdom. You want to martyr somebody to shut down debate and elevate political narratives. That's what that Kimmel suspension is about, of course. It's very important to understand that, but also understand that this creation of enemies to justify crackdowns is not new when it comes to African people. The reason that we picked the hate that hate produced this week as the animating theme is that, of course, in 1959, the CBS affiliate and a young guy named Mike Wallace did a documentary on the so-called documentary on the Nation of Islam in New York, the New York affiliate. And that was the first time many people outside of African communities in places like Detroit, Chicago, and New York, and Washington, D.C. and places became aware of a young minister in the Nation of Islam named Malcolm X. And so that was 1959. Contrast that with 2024, when the daughters of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King walked the runway at the New York Fashion Week with a black-owned, black-controlled, and black community, global black community, by the way, supporting. Shout out to the Nigerians who walked that same runway this week to model the Nigerian Summer Olympic uniforms that brought the world to the attention, brought actively black to the attention of the world. But at any rate, here we are in 1959, the introduction of many people in the social structure to the Nation of Islam. The hate that hate produced, the idea that black nationalism is a response to, what is black nationalism a response to? The hate that hate produced. So if it's black hatred, which of course it isn't, but understood, if it's black hatred, it's in response to white hatred. Yeah, but you left the white hatred out and you made it look like the people talking about white hatred were crazy. But it didn't work because really what you did do in the social structure, you tried to raise an alarm and create this notion of this manufactured threat to national in terms of white supremacy security. But it had the unintended consequence in the governance formation of making a lot of people of African descent aware of the nation and saying, oh, that's interesting. Like that billboard that the SNCC folk often talk about when they're talking about the 60s, the fight there in Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee and North Carolina and all these places, when they're talking about that and they say you on the way to Highlander Folk School in Tennessee, see billboards with Martin Luther King sitting in an interracial audience in the front row looking up at whoever's speaking, and they got his face circled in a red circle, and they say, here's Martin Luther King at communist training school. And how they were riding down these white young people who had come from the North trying to find their way to this meeting. And they passing these billboards in the South every few miles. And you see this billboard with this picture and it says Martin Luther King at communist training school, Martin Luther King at communist training school. And one of the white kids said to other white kids, those billboards are stupid. Why? Because they tell you he's at the communist training school, but they don't tell you how to get there. So the hate that hate produced 1959, yeah, oh my God, the Nation of Islam, what the hell is going on? What is that? And creating these enemies to justify cracking down on black people. And black people look like, oh my goodness, I need to look more into the nation. Well, maybe not join them, but I might respect them. So this whole notion of fascism, us versus them, you got to create a them and that them is increasingly wider as the us becomes increasingly narrow. People ain't down with Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon. People ain't down with Russell Voughton and Kevin Roberts. People ain't down with these people. However, look at the attempt to create this illusion that we are. You pass it, you vote on a resolution. Really? You vote on a resolution in the United States Congress to decry violence. When you don't do that, when other people are killed, or you don't do a big one, or you don't pass any legislation, I absolutely agree with someone who said, now you should introduce the Charlie Kirk anti-violence bill and ban assault weapons and ban these. Oh, not gonna pass. They're not gonna let that happen. And when they did put this resolution up, 58 members of the Congressional Black Caucus were among, I think, the 72 who voted against the resolution. Thank you. And I'm not dividing this by gender, because what is on the record, what Ta-Nehisi writes about in his article, and so many other people's, that has been said by the former leader of Turning Point USA about Black women will be enough to say any Black woman can't vote. I mean, but it shouldn't just be Black women. It wasn't just Black women who voted against in terms of Congressional Black Caucus. Now, there were 5 members of the Congressional Black Caucus that voted for the resolution, including the minority leader of the House of Representatives. I understand, brother. You got to take your orders and you got to do what you got to do. Vote your conscience, I think is how you described it, didn't you, Brother Jeffries? But at the same time, and then I think there were 4 members who voted present, and then 4 who didn't vote, who weren't there to vote. But either way, you're trying to force people into using our common humanity and decrying any form of violence to shoehorn it into a very narrow definition of us. And even if everybody had voted for it, you think that's going to make us any more human in the eyes of white nationalists? No, you're trying to use it as a means to an end. It is the true hate that hate produced. And so I used that phrase this week, the hate produced, because that is the name of that 1959 documentary in which Black self-determination is narrated as hatred, which of course it is not. But that the hate that produced Black self-determination as a defense mechanism, understand, in our governance formation, the hate that it produced ain't never laid out. It's just like these crazy Black people say the white man is the devil. Where in the hell would they get that idea? But at any rate, it's very interesting, this hypocrisy. And then, of course, the hypocrisy of the free speech absolutism in this social structure. The idea that you're free speech absolutists until you seize control of the apparatus, at which point censorship is your thing. But guess what the unintended consequence is? Some of these people, anytime you see somebody like Rafael Cruz out of Texas, Ted Cruz, start saying, wait a minute, I'm nervous now about you taking comedians off the air. Yeah, because you know they might turn it on you. Ain't that guy who the president said your daddy had something to do with the Kennedy assassination? He's off the reservation of, I shouldn't even say off the reservation because that's a slur against indigenous people. He's off the chain. He ain't never had no chain around his neck, nothing. And Cruz and them a little nervous now. In fact, I saw a term last night that I thought was interesting. They talking about a woke right. What does that mean? I mean, now you're going to try to say that these white nationalists who are turning on the comedians might turn on you next. Yeah, you're nervous now, aren't you? So maybe you are a true free speech absolutist. I would agree with Heather Cox Richardson, the historian and very active on social media and her blogs, who says that, you know, the term Democrat is used now for anybody who's not with them. It doesn't matter what your politics are. If you criticize Trump, if you criticize the white nationalists, you're a Democrat. Democrat, radical left, whatever. I give Donald Trump a whole lot of credit because Trump's lowest common denominator, DEI, whiteness, has tapped into that lowest common denominator, deeply undereducated ethos, the zeitgeist of white supremacy, the spirit of white supremacy, which means you just talk to them in a certain way, radical left Democrat, and it just hits the psyche. And what it bubbles up out of that is that tiny minority of people who are scared. And it engenders the kind of derivative hatred that hate produced. This is the great fear. This is the great fear. I'm repurposing something that W.E.B. Du Bois says that began to kind of wind itself for today. Du Bois said in the speech he gave at Hampton University, that is generally known as the Hampton idea. where Dr. Du Bois talks about the great fear. The great fear is that, these Negroes are going to get animated. There's going to be an engendering of spirit. This energy is going to burst forth. And, I thought about that yesterday. I thought about that on Friday, for those of you listening after Saturday, Friday, the 19th of September. We had a, something that just dinged me. The opening convocations, this is opening convocation seasons at universities. And, the black folk do with pop circumstances. I changed those robes and a lot of other things. But either way, I like the convening of community yesterday at Howard University. There was the opening convocation. Shout out to my sister, comrade, the brilliant Sherilyn Eiffel, who was the founding director of the 14th Amendment Center at the Howard University School of Law. She gave the address. She was what is known as the oratrix, not the orator, but the oratrix. Yesterday, a brilliant speech. If you want to see it, you can go on YouTube, Howard University's YouTube channel. Start at around minute 51. You need to go through all the pomp circumstance, let you just enter that kind of thing. But at around minute 51, Sherilyn began speaking. And she talked about, it's very interesting. She did a classroom teacher thing, classic thing. I used to see Sidney Rabeau, the 16th president of Howard University, my friend Sidney Rabeau, do this in a big audience. He would turn the whole place into a classroom. I saw Freeman Rabowski do something like that, the former president of University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, graduate of Hampton University, Birminghamian. Of course, as we passed last week, the moment, the anniversary of the murders of those 6 young people in Birmingham, 4 girls at 16th Street Baptist Church and 2 boys in the streets of Birmingham later that day. Freeman Rabowski's from Birmingham, came through Hampton, eventually was at UMBC for a number of years. I seen Freeman Rabowski do this, I saw Sidney Rabeau do this, and I watched Sherilyn Eiffel do it yesterday, turn the whole audience into a classroom. She said, so people began naming the founders. Who are some of the founders of the United States? And they started naming Hamilton and Jefferson, Madison, Washington. And she said, yeah, I see y'all saw the play. And everybody started laughing. She said, but I want to add some names, maybe even switch out some names. She didn't say switch out. I'm saying switch out. She said, Charles Sumner, Fred Douglass, Francis Ellen Watkins Harper, John Hingham, Thaddeus Stevens. It's okay, yeah. She said, but her point was this. She says, this founding, when I think of founding people for the United States, it's them. But when you say founders, you talk about these other people. Now, it's a brilliant speech. I encourage you all. She ends the speech by saying, our faith and belief as a people on these shores, our faith and belief as a people on these shores has never been dictated by what is going on in their world. And when she said it, y'all got to watch it. Sherilyn said, our faith and belief as a people on these shores has never been dictated by what's going on in their world. Then she points, in their world. It was a clear articulation of the distinction between governance, who we are to each other, and social structure, who we are to other people. I'm thinking through that, listening to it through an Africana studies lens. And if you're out there saying you're doing Black studies and you're not grounding it in a disciplinary perspective, in a perspective like that, you're not doing Black studies. You may be studying Black people, but you're using something else. Trust me. And if you believe you aren't, that's fine. Ain't got time to argue, because we are now jailbroken the university. And so it's really kind of irrelevant. Okay. But the point is this, in listening to that, what she did was, however, give the whole speech is an articulation of a vision of something beyond this. And she stopped short of enthusiasm, because my sister is very temperate in this, even as she's very passionate and very clear about it. See, when I have enthusiasm about this, it's because I'm putting this in the longer view of human history. Things die. And she said this yesterday brilliantly. Endings lead to beginnings. We're at a beginning. This is why I say I'm enthusiastic, not because of the pain, not because of the blood, not because of the heightened caution. We must have all of that, because we are dealing with a murderous society. And the murderers ain't just for this week, last week, week before, or a month from now. No, I'm talking about from the beginning, originary violence, the hate that hate produced. And so I'm very clear that we got to be heightened awareness now. But it's very interesting. when she said something is being born, it resonated with me because I remember the election night of 2016. We had our freshman seminars when we were doing the freshman seminar at Howard, and in the wake of it, these young people didn't know what to do. So the next day, we invited everybody to that same auditorium Sherilyn spoke in yesterday. And in that auditorium, I asked my man Big Pat and TJ and them to play "Didn't I Blow Your Mind This Time?" Play that music. Why? Because these young people don't understand this is where you live. And in that moment, we had panelists of faculty who came and talked, and we had this conversation with these young people and with everybody in the community, because people are like, oh my God. No, understand this is the heroic age. Sherilyn made that point yesterday. Sherilyn Eiffel made that point yesterday. It is in these moments, the so-called nadir. And sis, I heard you. She asked at that point, she said, the nadir was like 1877, I think, to 1901. Is Greg Carr here? No, I was watching the streaming, sis. I was down at Sirius XM, and I ain't beat my way back to campus, but I watched you the stream. And so, yeah, you had the number right. She knew she had it right. I don't know. That was a very nice thing. You did name check me in front of all those Negroes like that. But I understand. But the nadir, the dark period, the period she cited from Rayford Logan. I usually keep Rayford Logan. Rayford Logan, who was a Howard University historian, friend of Carter G. Woodson and Charles Hamilton Houston and others, who talked about that period between 1877, the end of Reconstruction, and 1901, when George White, the last congressperson out of a black congressperson for a generation, was voted out of office in 1901. Also a Howard University graduate, by the way, George White. But she said, that is the period when you see the rise of these heroic figures. It's usually in the social structure that we find ourselves in this modern world system, particularly the United States, when it looks the worst is when we produce the best. This is a heroic age, y'all. While in the social structure of white supremacy, this is the hate that hate produced. In our governance formation, as I move now to governance formation, this is the moment when we now elevate. I think that's why those numbers are going up in terms of algorithms, people watching stuff. What do we do? What do we do? You must remember. And remember, we've been at this now nearing on 300 Saturdays in a row, 300 weeks in a row. So understand that we're just a gateway. When you come in to be in conversation with us, we're going to introduce you to as much of the other stuff as possible so that you can rebuild that muscle, the momentum of memory. Our governance question, as we go to our second of the 6 categories, and the social structure was the heavy one this week. So these will go very quickly as we kind of begin to wind up. Governance, who we are to each other, the second of the 6 conceptual categories in our Africana studies framework. Who are we to each other? Who determines the protocols and controls the spaces and the rules? How is power exercised in our communities and beyond? When you see the CBC, most of the Congressional Black Caucus vote against that resolution. Greg Meeks and Hakeem Jeffries, they didn't vote for it. But guess what? It don't matter. I'm very proud of the ones that did, because it's all symbolic. It's a symbolic gesture. But what it does is engender a notion that we ain't just going to take this L. Civic education becomes a form of resistance. Last week was Constitution Day in the United States of America. And I won't go into the history of Constitution Day. I'm very proud of our sister, Professor Angie Porter, down at American University. She spoke at Constitution Day at the great Bowie State University, formerly the Maryland College for the Colored. She spoke there on Constitution Day about Africana legal studies and the question of protocol, and I had my students a couple of weeks ago read her article on Africana legal studies. Her first article, she's since published more, but in that moment, Angie's not talking about fealty to these enslavers, these captors, these people who held us captive, those so-called founding fathers, as Alton Maddox called them, fleeing felons. In fact, the brother who preached the eulogy for Alton Maddox, the great lawyer Alton Maddox, Brother Kevin Johnson, who is the lead minister, the senior minister at Abyssinian Baptist Church. Him and I had a little bit of an exchange the other night on Roland Martin Unfiltered. I don't know if y'all saw it. If you did, fine. If you didn't, fine. But he gave a sermon the same time all these preachers were talking about sermons. He was talking about our founders came up. I just asked him, I said, man, what are you talking about? Our founders. Sherilyn was much more clear about this. Maybe Sherilyn's a lawyer too, and a legal scholar, first rank. So maybe, no. George Washington, you're not my dad. Madison, Jefferson, you cats were literally human traffickers. So when Sherilyn moves the founding to the 14th Amendment, 13, 14, and 15, but the 14th Amendment, as she reminded people yesterday, the longest amendment in the Constitution, she is forming in league with people like Kermit Roosevelt, who talks about that as the founding. This is the founding of any possibility. And if the thing falls apart, this is the only thing I would add to Sherilyn. If the thing falls apart, we don't fall apart. Who we are to each other. Civic education is a form of resistance. It's a form of nation building. It's a form of educating those who want to be part of something different. That's what Sherilyn was talking about. What comes next? In fact, she said that early on in the speech. The ending then leads to the question, what comes after? The United States not going to be here. Egypt wasn't here. Rome is not here. These societies reform. Don't be scared. You know who's scared? Those who are producing this derivative hatred. Ways of knowing. How do we know each other? When Martin King is talking about the other America, he ain't just talking about Black people. What he is doing, which is why he blended materialism or capitalism, critique of capitalism, which he said, he told Andrew Young, the problem is, Andy, you're a capitalist. I'm not. In a meeting they had in Newark, New Jersey, near the end of his life, he's blending that with militarism, this whole attempt to be a policeman of the whole world. The reason he blends that with racism because Dr. King is an African person. The hoodie, Lottie Smith and them Actively Black hoodie that Bernice had on, walking next to Ayasha Shabazz as they walking down the runway in New York Fashion Week, had a picture of her daddy. And it said, yes, I'm Black and I'm proud of it. This is a direct quote from her father. So let's be clear. Dr. King is not saying this as some mythical, amorphous, raceless American. He's saying it standing in the foundation of his institutions, the institutions that produced him, that were not integrated. Not that white people couldn't come to Ebenezer Baptist Church then and now, but they didn't. Not that Black people would go to Morehouse. They could, but they didn't. Not that Black people were part of the white people rather were part of the congregation at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. They were not. Not that white people participated in the Montgomery bus boycott. You ever ask yourself, did white people stay off the bus? White people rode the bus in Montgomery too. That's why you had to have sections. Read Joanne Robinson's book. I'm kind of bringing this to a close. The ways of knowing how we know what we know. We ground our movement politics in what we know and believe and think, and we activate it when necessary. We don't have a lot of wasted motion as Africans in white supremacist spaces. Whether it be Mr. and Mrs. Carr, whether it be any of us who we could say, well, they weren't in the marches. Where's Mr. and Mrs. Hunter? Building institutions, training their daughter. Where Mr. and Mrs. Carr? Making sure they got food on the table and that their little boy can go sit in that corner and read as many books as he wants, and his brother and sister can do the same. Creating the space so that in this relay, in this chain, in this unbroken genealogy that starts with their ancestors who they will never know and comes through time and space over tens of thousands of years to the ones they did know, their parents in Tennessee and Alabama, their parents in South Carolina and Virginia, their parents in North Carolina and Mississippi, their parents congeals into the moment of, oh, is it time? Let's go. Which is why we're here week after week after week to get that momentum of memory back. When Malcolm X appears in The Hate That Hate Produced, this early attempt to weaponize media to create a derivative hate based on the originary hate of whiteness that backfires. There's no framing of how Black self-determination works. And the centerpiece of our Africana Studies framework requires us to ground ourselves, who we are to each other, what ways we know. The public speech of Ta-Nehisi Coates, Ta-Nehisi, whose name literally means black. Ta, land, Nehesi, black. That's what it means in Medu Neter. When he's writing about the manipulation of memory and martyrdom, when he's writing about the Holocaust, the genocide in Gaza, when he's pushing it back against Ezra Klein, who is absurd, just as absurd as the president of Barnard College, who wrote in the same New York Times that this dialogue was open and engaging and Turning Point was doing it. Ha ha. Did you listen? Oh, you don't care. You've got something that you are suborning, even if it's accidental or even if it's unintentional, because in that same New York Times, you see Ross Dohat, you see Brett Stevens, and they are not soft white nationalists. They are broad white nationalists. And guess what? Now the CEO of the New York Times is pushing back like, oh, hell no. By the way, the federal judge dismissed your lawsuit against the Times, didn't they, bozo? But guess what, brother? Guess what, brother Trump? Try again or not. It don't matter, because you know that going to court is not because you will win. It's because you continue to press this notion of your inevitability. And the more desperate you are, the more clear to us is that you are not inevitable. The third category, ways of knowing, understands that we understand the rhythms of the universe, and we understand God don't like ugly, and we understand from our independent knowledge hubs, this being one, that we remind ourselves of that. Fourth category of the six, science and technology. How do we use our science? How do we imagine the world and then act in that world on the material world, the natural world, the built environments? Even as we see this attempt to make media a technology of control, the billionaires consolidating controls over platforms. We see the attempt to take these platforms and scrub of certain content and censor certain content and suppress certain content. Well, guess what? Virtual is the moving target that doesn't land. As we was talking about last week, we move without perching. This is virtual. Everybody here and who will be here understand that you and I, we all live in the real world. We live in the physical world, and we use this virtual world to connect to each other. And when that real world intersects with their virtual world, we see the bloom. The attempt to control media is the attempt to suppress the idea that we are in our various places doing what we need to do, and replace it with the illusion that somehow we will be suppressed and opposed. Trump moves from, we're going to Chicago. Yeah, Democrat governor, Democrat mayor. We're going to Memphis. Yeah, because you got a white nationalist governor and Bill Lee. As Tammy Sawyer was explaining on Sirius last week, this whole notion. Yeah, but guess what? Out of that comes the heroic notion. Tammy said something that I'm sure has been said other places. And Prof, you talked about this a lot when it comes to Black economic self-determination. In fact, you devote a week every week on Sirius to this. The idea that, guess what? Tammy said, we should have a Black green book, another green book. Yeah, you don't have to call it a Black green book. You have another green book. Guess what? Since you want to occupy our city, we're going to make sure these Black businesses stay in business, because we lost some businesses when people stopped coming because they're scared to come in, because you created the illusion that you policing the whole city. Nah. Let's strengthen ourselves in this moment, and let's maybe pick off a few cornerbacks and quarterbacks and running backs and defensive ends and defensive tackles and tight ends. Let's pick a few of them off them rosters of these schools that are in these cities you want to invade. You want to invade Memphis? You know how well Penny Hardaway is at Memphis State, and that would be a tragedy, Penny. But maybe you should move to a HBCU, because guess what, brother? It's time for some forwards and some centers and some guards and some shooting guards and some point guards to move from them white schools and come on to the HBCUs. Going across the state line to play for Jackson State. Go play, Lemoyne don't have a team right now. That's all right. Tennessee State is there. Fisk is there. You can go to some of these other schools if you want to stay in the state of Tennessee. If you don't want to stay in the state of Tennessee, go somewhere else. Or go to a white school where somebody has a commitment to something else. Because guess what? They met this week at the University of California, Berkeley. How are we going to respond to this? And some people punch these people in the mouth. You're not going to shake us down for millions of dollars. We're going to court on you. So media as technology of control, sure, they want to seize that. But virtual is the target that doesn't land. And guess what? We live in a world. So if they seize control of the domestic stuff, there's a world out there. We got platforms that through our connections, if we will simply internationalize our thing, that we can build that are beyond their control. This algorithmic warfare. Social media has never been neutral. It's manipulated in many ways, in this case, to suppress dissent. And there are people out there who are building their own platforms. Nubia is a social media platform. Karen Hunter had the prescience to say, yeah, and now people are flooding in, Hayes and them doing stuff. Okay, fine. Got to build these independent platforms. There's a growing call to abandon these compromised platforms in favor of organizing offline and doing independent institution building. And we use these virtual spaces to find each other. We're clearinghouses. Cultural meaning making, the fifth of the six categories. How do we express ourselves? Yes, there's an attempt to continue in the vein of the hate that hate produced. Disney, you want to throw Jimmy Kimmel off the air? Well, you don't want to be reminded that the house the mouse built, that mouse was in blackface, as we talked about very early on. Mickey Mouse, a minstrel figure. We talked about that in one of the earlier in classes. Maybe you don't want to be reminded of that we need to push back. Our cultural meaning making is also very important. This hoodie I have on today, I got this Saturday night at the Martin Luther King Library, because last week was DC's Art All Night, the big go-go concert in the street, thousands of people. Over the arc of the evening, tens of thousands of people. The Martin Luther King Library opened till like 3:00 in the morning. First floor, these young people love this. What is this thing? The silent disco, where they all got they had a silent disco on the first floor. Then they had people singing on the main floor of the first floor, acoustic guitar, electric guitar, poets, very beautiful. Then you go upstairs on the roof, they had a whole Caribbean band, and then they had all the African music, the vendors, the food is so beautiful, everything. I met several members of the District of Columbia's Caribbean community. And I didn't ask them whether I could repeat their names here, but I just say that they are here. What's going on, y'all? They in Nubia. They never miss a week. I'm like, listen, this is a beautiful thing. They're in the streets. Of the thousands of people I saw. And by the way, this hoodie is the go-go bands from the day. This is from one of the earlier Art All Nights, which was on the 28th. And it's all over the city. We were talking about on the radio, but you see here, the Martin Luther King Library was one place, but then you see the names of many of the bands, Black Alley, Junkyard Band, Push Play, Backyard Band. They all perform. And I'm saying, look at these people. Now, it was open to everybody. I say white people probably made up somewhere between 1% and 1% of the people I saw. Not that white people couldn't be there. I saw a handful of white people, but it was African people. And then the police, it's like all the black people in DC police was there, because police got to be there, but it was our people. And then I saw a handful of white people, ironically, mostly white shirts. If law enforcement, I'm like, wow, this is crazy. Guess who I didn't see? Not one member of the National Gardeners. There's no National Gardeners there. It's DC. Now, the illusion will be, oh man, it's occupied, Trump and them, man, I know they, nah, but it's cultural meaning making. This is how we push back. The Go-Go Museum, my man Ron Moten, I think it's coming up October the 4th. They're having a fundraiser there. They're trying to raise $500,000. If you're ever in DC, go southeast, go right off of Martin Luther King Avenue there, near the big chair, if you know DC, and the Go-Go Museum. The history of go-go, which Ron Moten begins in Africa. All the go-go people know. You listen to that beat, it's an African beat. Cultural meaning making. We understand that there's a lot of public spectacle. There's a lot of distraction, but we are resisting and we are building music, performance, fashion, all of that. Finally, the 6th category, movement and memory. How do we remember? What do we do? These historical echoes, the momentum of our memory must be there. It's important not only to wear Martin Luther King hoodies, but to listen to Martin Luther King's words. Not through a documentary, that's fine as a point of entry, but listen to him himself, as Professor Hunter had us do this morning to begin this conversation. We resist through remembrance. Those comparisons of the documentary, The Hate That Hate Produced, to the real hate that hate produced is important because it allows us to displace the social structure attempts to narrate who we are and replace it with who we are to each other. This contemporary memory work, like what I heard Sherilyn Ifill do yesterday at Howard's opening convocation, is very important to remember who we are. We must build and sustain our independent platforms. We must teach real memory, remind ourselves, not the sanitized versions. We must organize offline in the real world and connect online. Keep that momentum going. We must refuse the creation of a inaccurate and an artificial sense of inevitability. That is the playbook of fascism, to try to convince you that somehow they're stronger than you when the reality is anything but. And we must honor memory by making it a tool for resistance, not dissanctified silence and disengagement, but a steady awareness and a steady building of memory, so that when the time comes to mobilize, we, like those women in Montgomery, won't be caught flat-footed, but we will be ready because we will have been doing it all along.
I was trying to get the Sister Soldier video up, but I didn't want to get a YouTube strike. But
which one?
The Hate That Hate Produced. Are y'all
oh yes, of course. Duh. Come on, bring it home. Come on, Prof. That's right.
You know what? I'm gonna do this. Yeah, we don't care.
No, don't do it. Don't do it. Let them go. Look, drop the link. Drop the
drop
link. Let it percolate.
okay. Yo,
Shout out to your homie, Lisa Williamson. Shout out to
oh my goodness. And again, young people, this is your time. This your time. Sister Soldier raising hell on the campus of Rutgers University. Kevin Powell, one of her soldiers who will be on my show on Monday, and has evolved into such and again, giving people time to catch up with their own humanity, catch up with their own maturity, and some of us need to sit more deeply in that quest. But again, it was young people on campuses that fomented and forged the Black Panther movement. Young people. That's right. Young people.
Shout out to my sister Kelly Sparrow Mickens, who was part of that Rutgers student body, because those young people at Rutgers, man, they turned the world upside down in that period. So yes, absolutely. And of course, Kelly was with Philadelphia Freedom School. So yeah. Wow.
I mean, you think about Sister Soldier being in the middle of a presidential campaign. You think about Bill Clinton using her as a weapon against Black. It's wild that we even allowed that. But anyway, here we are. Okay. And she now is writing books that inspiring people. But yeah, no, this was liberating today. As always, every day.
Liberate ourselves. Yeah.
289 and counting. I like that you talked about the space in the way that it is. It's convening, it's a remembrance, it's a call to action. It's up to you, everyone who's listening, to do something. This is not sitting here,
That's right.
Being fed. Like, this should be the fuel for you to get up and do. So
that's right. That's right. And shout out to all of y'all too for connecting us to these historically Black high schools. There's a great exhibit at the Carnegie Library here in DC. I didn't know about it till yesterday. I went down there because it's unfortunately where the Apple store is. They've rented out this was a library anyway. The top floor is a history of Black education in DC, and it's got Dunbar and Armstrong. I just want to thank everybody, Prof, who has been raising these historically Black schools that their parents went to and their grandparents on the air, on Sirius. I'm taking all that back to these students at Howard. And of course, all of this is preparing for the real larger work, which is the whole Black University thing that we're going to launch soon. But I'm just gathering information. So shout out to all y'all, because we did it already. Your parents did it. My parents did. We did it. Yeah. We don't have to reinvent the thing. We did this before.
we have to remember, and then have a little bit of discipline. As you mentioned, the Apple store. You don't need another iPhone.
Nope.
Like, we may not be able to dismantle the largest institutions in this country, but we can make an impact one at a time. Target is feeling. Target was not the most egregious. Amber Cabral, who used to work at Walmart, she said, why didn't we go after number one? Because all that did, we hurt number 7. Now everybody's still going to number 1 and 2, and we can.
How about that?
You can.
And number 7. Did you see? You may have talked about it. Did you see? Walmart now is expanding its home delivery thing. I was reading in FT
drones that they're using.
Exactly. Isn't that something? Oh, y'all don't want to come? Okay, so now they're trying to take Amazon. Like, you can't. This thing is protein, y'all. It's like,
I mean, and again, I know y'all can't get off of the NFL, but were we doing something before there was an NFL? Did we have something before there was an Major League Baseball? Did we have things before there were things that now we can't seem to not bet on and have fantasy football? That's wild to me. 70% of the league is us running up and down the field while the owners sit in these boxes that the most lucrative league in the world. And they've given us a finger.
Well, I'm going to tell you right now, the thing, this, of course, now is in the past. Remember last Saturday when you warmed our hearts talking about our sister Nina Gilbert and her crew. And then everybody was in Jersey at the game. The HBCU games, look, You want to watch football? Listen, them Negroes in Greensboro this weekend. My niece and them down there. A&T is playing North Carolina Central. That's the biggest game of the year. They're not thinking about no NFL. In fact, if y'all at the tailgate right now with this on, y'all make sure my niece got some clothes on because you don't play that. But the point is this: they having fun. It's the HBCU games. Prof, how was it though? Did you?
God. It was so, I used to do it regularly because my dad was a Q. So,
of
all
course.
the
He had to go.
There, they tailgating and I was going when it was in New York at Yankee Stadium. That's how long ago.
Yeah, that's the early class, the Whitney Young. Yeah.
Yes. And so now it's
the game.
In the parking lot. I was like, I don't even want to leave the parking lot. I mean, the smell, the cooking, the food, the music, you could get some reggae over here and some go-go over there and some old school hip hop.
Oh.
It was homecoming personified. It was everything. And I didn't go to a HBCU, but if you go to one of these games, you went to a HBCU. It was just beautiful.
Exactly.
And in the area that Morehouse was, there were a couple of infiltrators from Howard because, there's no.
Of course. Starting some stuff.
No, but I'm saying as friends showing up in their Howard gear in the area with the Morehouse people. Well, it was just beautiful. And I was like, this is what it's about, and I was just there for the band and for the support because the game was hard.
How about that? Well, you know how that is. Look, that's the ugly secret of HBCU football. God bless. I mean, like Grambling, Tennessee State, we there for the game too. But the band and the tailgate, Negroes don't even come. At South Carolina State, they was having a problem because they didn't want to come in the stadium. They had to tailgate.
The parking lot was completely full, and it was okay. It was just beautiful, and it's just a reminder. It's a reminder of who we are to each other, and this is the way forward. I don't know. The NFL ain't put nothing in my community. Period. You could put in racism in the end zone and honor the absolute opposite of that. It's hypocrisy on full display. You could have 70% of those men on those football fields running the ball and getting CTEs, and then have Jerry Jones who stood in the way of Black people going to school. It's y'all got to sit with that. Doesn't that taste nasty in your mouth? Like it feels wrong. And the more I think about it, the more I'm so glad that I have not watched an ounce of football. If my TV is on a particular channel, I'm actively making sure that I change the channel, because I'm not giving you.
I know that's right.
Nothing, no eyeballs, period. But I get it. They've gotten you wedded to something that is not wedded, to your common humanity. But it's
no question.
Maybe we don't need everybody, as we talked about with King playing. He said, I don't lead on consensus. I don't care if everybody don't like this is what is right. So do what's right.
That's right.
I love you.
Do what's right. I love you too. Enjoy the rest of this day. Everybody, y'all stay safe. It is crazy out there. Sherilyn reminded us it was crazy too. But let's just enjoy the rest of the day and see y'all Monday night.
Where can we stream that on YouTube? Her speech?
Oh yeah. We can. Actually, maybe no, it's easy. It's at Howard University's YouTube site. The opening commencement around minute 51. We could, if y'all want, we can watch it Monday in office hours and talk about it. Maybe we'll do that together on office hours. Yeah, that'll be good. Yeah. Okay, we'll do that then. We'll see you Monday night. Love you. See you later.
Love you too. All right. Bye, y'all. Have a wonderful day.
To be honest enough to tell you that I'm worried about America. Yeah. I'm worried about our nation because it's sick with racism still. Just think about the fact that we live in a nation which was founded on the principle that all men are created equal. And yet men are still arguing over whether the color of a man's skin determines the content of his character. And I believe that the Lord told me to say to the United States of America that is sick with militarism and is sick with excessive materialism. Have you ever thought about it? There are between 38 and 50 million people